Hello and welcome to the Inquisitive Universe. As usual, my name is Jeffrey and I got stuff to show you. These are my consoles. This is the OG. This revolutionized gaming as we know it. This was the first mainstream 3D console. This is the OG PlayStation. I've had this for over 2 decades now, approximately, or close to 2 decades now. Not up to 2 decades, close to. And this is the big bad boy himself. This is the OG PlayStation 2, the big one. I mean, there's a smaller one, but it's somewhere over there. I really can't reach it. Now, what if I told you that you could have these two inside this? Well, welcome to the video. Let's get started. Alright, so in today's video, we're going to be talking about emulation and emulators. Right, and emulation, emulators, what does that mean? I mean, obviously, we're going to start by defining. If you've been watching my videos, you know I always define. So, let's define emulation first. Emulation simply means to copy something, to behave like something else, right? So in computing, or rather in computer terms, emulation can be defined as making one computer, which we're going to call the host now, making one computer to behave in the same way as another computer or as another computing device, which we're going to call the guest. So in emulation, we're going to be making one device behave like another one. That's what we mean by emulation. Then an emulator is the software or hardware add-on that enables the host computer emulate or behave like another computer. That's basically what it is. It's as simple as that. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about video game emulators, of which you have seen my OG consoles, the OG PlayStation and the OG PlayStation 2. In video game emulation, we are going to be making a smartphone. Usually sometimes PCs are also there, but this is mostly a smartphone centric channel, so we're going to be talking about smartphones the most. So it's about making a smartphone, a regular smartphone, a regular old smartphone, behave like a video game console so that you can play games on them. Retro games, like I'm going to go into that, but games from a video game console can be run on something as small as your smartphone, and you know your smartphone can be able to behave as though it were a game console. Now, in order for your smartphone to do this, it needs what is called an emulator. So an emulator can be defined as a software, mostly because most video game emulation is done by software, is a software that runs or that enables your smartphone to behave as though it was a game console. It's that simple. So let's move on now to, like, I mean, what's the big deal about emulation? Why do I need to emulate anything? Because I mean, it's just go and get a console and then play on a television, right? Well, when it comes to old games like that, it's not that straightforward. So why do we need emulation? Old consoles are not, I mean, you could be lucky if you could find a few good ones, but it's not really easy to find them. And in the case of mine, I mean, one of them still runs, the OG PlayStation 1 still runs, the PlayStation 2 doesn't, because it's got some components that are bad. It's not that easy to, you know, find parts to fix them. I know, yes, it's possible, but going through the hassle of an old console, it's really not, I don't think it's all that worth it. And then another thing too is that even if you do get them working, you get them running, you are going to run into the problem of, you know, how do you find games for them? Because apart from the PlayStation 2 that can run, you know, software-based ROMs or games, the OG PlayStation 1 can't. I mean, there's no ports here where you can plug in any modern attachments via USB, so to speak, and it hasn't got any wireless capabilities either. So how do you get games in software form to run on that thing? Because basically the CD format is dead. Basically, I mean, there are still some people who still have them in stock, but the CD format is mostly gone, especially if you live in a country like mine, where it's going to be next to impossible to find PlayStation 1 discs and possibly even PlayStation 2 discs physical format. So these are some of the, you know, there could be other reasons too, but to keep this video short, I'm going to be, you know, like staying on track here. There could be other reasons, but these are some of the reasons why you may want to be considering emulation. So the next up, we're going to be talking about the types of video games that have been emulated, and then basically the means by which the emulation is done. Now I'm going to start with the simple one, the means. It's software, basically. Most of the emulators that we see on smartphones are done by people who took software and then created software that are able to, you know, teach our phones to mimic the hardware of a console, basically. That would then, you know, give the smartphone the ability to run games that were originally designed for either this or for that one, because originally the games were software that they were put into a physical format. So most of these games still are still alive or still exist in a digital format. So if you can trick those software that you are inside the hardware of so and so game that it was made for, voila, it's going to run. So the only issue we're probably going to run into is system requirements, which I'm going to get into later on in the video. So what type of games have been emulated? Well, for the most part, newer games are still too powerful, right, to be emulated. Anything from the PlayStation 3, and I don't think I've ever seen any Xbox console being emulated, so I'm going to stick with what I know. Anything from the PlayStation 3 and above has not been emulated yet, but from the mid 2000s down, yeah, so emulation mostly targets older consoles, like those from the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and in the early 2000s, early to mid 2000s. So obviously you're probably going to be seeing consoles being emulated, like those of the Amiga Power, the Atari Jaguar, the Sega Mega Drive 2, the Nintendo 64, the Sega Dreamcast, the PlayStation 1, the PlayStation 2, and handhelds too, like the PSP, for example. And I can't really think of any other handheld that has been emulated yet, but mostly these are the games that have been targeted by emulation. So if you are looking for emulators, these are probably what you're going to be seeing. So obviously, my time, I was born in the early 90s, obviously, and I grew up with consoles like the Terminator Ending Man, for example. I think that's a Nintendo Famicom knockoff. I grew up with the Sega Mega Drive as well, but I think these are the ones, these two, especially the OG Sony PlayStation and the PlayStation 2 will forever be closest to my heart, because these were basically the ones that, I mean, I owned an Ending Man and I owned the Sega Mega Drive too. I don't have them anymore. Maybe if I knew I'll be making a video like this someday, I would have probably kept them. I think I gave them away since as far back as 2005, 2006. But that one is an aside. These ones will forever be closest to my heart. I will never forget. I will never forget, like, when I saw the PlayStation 1 for the first time. That was sometime around 99, maybe even 2000, right? First time I saw a Sony PlayStation 1, and it was completely different from what I have been seeing. It was crazy, 3D graphics. And, I was like, video games cannot get any better. And then sometime around 2003, 2004, before you knock me, I know that the Sony PlayStation 2 was announced in 1999, but I did not see it physically until around 2004. So 2003, 2004, that was the first time I saw it, and I was like, I thought the PlayStation 1 was the zenith of what video games could do, but that was crazy to me. And now I'm sitting down here 23 years later or so, and these are retro games, and I'm no longer a kid. Wow, how did I grow on so fast? How did I? Oh, let's continue. Benefits. What are the benefits of emulation, so to speak? Now this is the part where I get old. No, seriously, this is the part where I get old. The very first things, especially if you grew up in that era like me, or if you are a gamer, okay, fine, let's say you didn't grow up in that era, but you've got the spirit of a gamer, you like games. The first thing that this emulation of these older games bring to you, it brings nostalgia. Even if you did not live in that time, it's a certain feeling of nostalgia that it gives to you. And if you did live in that era, you could basically be holding a controller and it will transport you to a very different time that no longer exists. It brings about like a sort of magic, so to speak, of simpler times, really. And that's the first one. The second one, I've got them here. I've got them jotted down here. The second one is mobility, portability, and then convenience if you want to play games, because these are only one half. In fact, it's only 1/3 of the whole thing, right? Because I've got a controller over there. Let me grab that quickly. Alright, so I said that's only 1/3. You need the console, you need a controller, you need a television or any sort of monitor, so to speak. You need wires and cables and connections and all that stuff. But with emulation, you don't need any of those. You just need this. Maybe you could pair it with this though, but you could, if you are the claw type of guy, because of the R1 and L1 shoulder buttons, if you're the claw type of guy, you could get that done. Really, you could. So it brings mobility, portability, as well as convenience. Yeah. Now, there is this joke I saw on Facebook about 90s kids carrying their TVs, from bedroom to bedroom trying to play video games, and that was totally me and my siblings. Totally, that was totally us. Right? That was totally us. Now, let's continue. It keeps you off the net, because nowadays, most of these, not just most app makers are trying to push you and keep you online. They want to keep you online for as much as possible so that they can, collect as much data as they can about you. And ISPs are very happy about it as well, because that way they get to make even more money off you, because you have to pay for data. As soon as you are able to, like download or acquire these games, it keeps you off the net, because you don't need any internet to play it. Nobody's going to be there monitoring what you like, what you don't like in game that they're going to be used to use to advertise products to you later on. No, it keeps you off the net, and then you can like save your data, so to speak. For gamers most especially, it gives you access to a wide library of games. Now, as much as there are lots of games for Android and iOS, the iOS and Android library doesn't match up when it comes to a combined catalog of PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 and Sega and all those games all put together that you can download and play, that you don't need to go online to download any extra deals, because I think that's one thing I love about old games. You downloaded the game, you downloaded the full complete stuff, you went to play, you have to work your ass off to pick the game. No pay to win, no nothing. It gives you the library of the PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 combined. I think it's going to be hard for, I know there are some shitty games that are made for the PlayStation 1, and especially the PlayStation 1, but the sheer richness and vastness of that library is something that Android and iOS can only hope to match. And then definitely it keeps you entertained, of course. All these mindless scrolling that you would have done on social media, if you were a gamer, you could use that time, as a workout for your brain and for your thumbs. So yeah, that's mostly it. So that would then take us to the last part of this video. Like I said, you need just a smartphone, and you need to pair it with a controller. So all smartphones are not made equal, not even in the slightest at all. And this is something that if you've known me for a while, or offline or online, or if you've been following this channel for a while, I have always been drumming about smartphone education to as many people that I come across, that I'm opportune to relate with, to interact with, that smartphone education is very, very important. All smartphones are not made equal, because it makes no sense. I don't care whose ox is called. It makes no sense for you to be buying an Infinix Hot 30 Play with a Helio G37 SoC when you could be buying better phones with better performance, like with the Helio G70 and G80 and G88 for the same amount of money. That would give you better performance, less lag, faster system, and etc. I don't care whose ox is God. You understand that? So I've always been on it. Smartphone education is very, very important. So let's look at the minimum specs if you want to play retro games. The very least. Okay, let's not start with the minimum. Let's look at the list. Stuff that can run games. Now, the list you should be looking at is a phone with either a Helio G25 or G35 and a Snapdragon 439. Or if you can get a 460, that would also be okay. A 439 or a 450 or a 460 processor. I think these ones will run emulators meant for 16-bit consoles, 8 and 16-bit consoles. Like the Sega Mega Drive, for example, that's a 16-bit console. The Nintendo 64, I think that's also a 16-bit console. You could run emulators for those ones. You get that's like the minimum if you really want. But those games are side scroll 2D. Cartoony stuff, but it depends on whatever you like, really. But the higher you go, the more requirements you need. Now that will take us to like the next step, what I'd call the first one I just mentioned are the least requirements, the second one are the minimum requirements, and that's what you need if you want to play let's say the Sony PlayStation 1, for example, and the Sega Dreamcast, and to an extent some PlayStation 2 games. These include a phone with a Helio G80, that's G80, G85, G88, they're all within the same family, G80, G88, G85, a Snapdragon 678 or a 680 processors. Then I think you would also need 4GB RAM as well, 4GB RAM minimum, as well as a 64-bit operating system, because the earlier set I just mentioned, I said phones with Helio G25 or a Snapdragon 439, those ones you could run, you could have them with 2GB RAM, for example, and use 32-bit operating systems with them. But the issue is that they would be unable to pair with a controller. I have a Redmi 9A and I've tried pairing that one. That's a 2GB RAM phone, 32-bit operating system, I think Android 10 or so, but I could not pair it with a controller no matter what I did, and I did not want to root the phone either. So if you want to be able to play with a controller, the minimum specs you should be looking at is a Helio G80 type phone, that's 80, 85, 88, or a Snapdragon 678 or a Snapdragon 680 with 4GB of RAM minimum, and the 64-bit Android operating system, anything from Android say 10 and above. And I think that's like that would be good enough for you to run PlayStation 1 games and some PlayStation 2 games, some PlayStation 2 games. Then moving forward, the recommended is something with an upper mid-range processor. and even that they would struggle, because I use the Redmi Note 9 Pro, and that one has a Snapdragon 720G SoC, and even though it runs The Sims 2 on PlayStation 2, it runs Revolution Soccer. I think I played 2013. It runs it okay, it runs it fine, although the power draws on the system is actually a lot. I think I also downloaded Shadow of the Colossus, and that one is another very, very tasking game. Like, you see these games like this, they push my phone to the maximum that it can go. So if you really want to play PlayStation 2 games, you are going to be looking at something like a Snapdragon 835 or Snapdragon 845 type phone, 845, 855, or a Snapdragon 765, or a Helio G99, a Snapdragon 690, like those upper mid-range processor types of phones with at least 6 gigabytes of RAM, and obviously a 64-bit operating system. These are the key specifications that you need depending on the level of games that you want to emulate and play. Right, so this video has taken a bit of time, right? So I'm going to recap very quickly. Emulation can be in computing terms can be defined as making one computer behave like another one. Video game emulation is making a smartphone behave like a console so that it can run console games, and there are several reasons why you should do that. Because comfort, convenience, portability, mobility, gives you the ability to play older games, opens you up to a huge library of games, keeps you offline. You don't have to spend as much time and as much data. All you have to do is maybe if you can find the games and then download them into your smartphone, and voila, you're good to go. And then the system requirements, I've mentioned them, they should be on the screen as well. So with that, we've come to the end of what has been a long video, right? So if you want to see the next video, please ensure to subscribe and share. I'm going to be talking about some emulators that I like and how to use them. I'm going to focus on 2 main ones. I'm not going to really the other ones are already mainstream, like PP, SSP, for example. There are tons of video on YouTube for that one, so I'm not really going to go into that. I'm going to be looking at 2 emulators for these 2 babies here, for the PlayStation 1 and for the PlayStation 2. That's how to use them, type of games you get, and they're free to use, no ads, nothing, no bullshit. Totally free to use and very, very easy to get around. So with that, we've come to the end of this video. Thank you for coming. I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.